Seems like I might be settling in for 3 a week. So far as my current schedules holds, that is. More things. And stuff. Closer to the capital. Lieutenant Commander Lewis scratched his chin as he looked around at the assembled Xenos. The ship he was on was bigger than his by a great deal. His bouncer-class heavy escort had a crew of 50, which was why he wasn't even a full commander and yet commanded a ship. But here he was on a Xeno ship that needed a crew of around 1,000, and they'd surrendered to him. When the 3 Kityan systems had surrendered to the first scout ship that jumped into range, the brass has assumed it was a fluke. Just a bunch of terrified colonists who didn't understand the scout ships weren't the sign of a large invasion force. But now, 15 US Marines were occupying 3 whole planets, so they figured they'd send a few ships out this way to scout the Kityan systems a bit more and see what was going on. He'd been chosen since the Longhorn convoys didn't need an escort, and his ship class was in a bit of an odd spot for the current war. When he jumped into a slightly more developed Kityan system, he found a ship his computer wanted to classify as a heavy battle cruiser or a light dreadnought already within range. Assuming the worst, he began to fire upon the ship and figured if worst came to worst, he'd sacrifice the ship and drive it into their bridge to take it out of the war for a while. Instead, he hadn't even begun true combat action when they surrendered, having never fired a shot. So now, he and all 15 Marines in his command were standing in the Xeno capital ship's hangar, looking at around 200 officers. Most of them were Kityans, which he had expected since this was Kityan space. What he didn't expect was the dozen or so space hamsters. And he sure as hell didn't expect them to be wearing top hats or fancy military uniforms that looked straight out of the late 1800s with mutton shops and sashes and outrageous-looking medals, except worn by space hamsters. The Kityans were humanoid cat people as far as he was concerned, but not the sort of vicious space predators he expected cats in space to be. These were all between 4 and 5 feet tall, and more of the house cat variety. From what he understood, the ship had been a joint project between the 2 species. But as he looked around the hangar, it didn't seem like either race was going to be sought after shipbuilders anytime soon. It was space-worthy, but he wasn't sure he'd want to take it into combat. He could see the areas where they'd patched electrical panels already, and in a few places, things didn't look even or level. And he figured if they didn't look right to the naked eye, they must be really messed up to any actual measurements. And this was the hangar. It was just supposed to be a big open area for smaller ships to dock. If they messed that up, what was the engine room or bridge like? Not to mention he hated the design in general. Shrugging it off, he looked at his tech that was setting up the projector, who finally nodded and gave him a thumbs up. He coughed for a moment and then tapped the mic he'd been given as everyone momentarily groaned and shied away from the feedback noise until the tech got it corrected. All right, I am Lieutenant Commander Lewis of the US Navy, the officer you've surrendered to. We're holding his meeting to field questions and explain a few things. He nodded to the tech, who tapped a button and brought up the first slide. Lewis shook a head for a moment as he looked at the font and color choice, wondering where the hell the tech had gone to school. Right. First off, we can't feed or house more than a few of you. My ship isn't made for that, and since your ship lacks skip drive capacity, you have to wait here until we figure out what to do. Questions? One of the space hamsters raised his hand.
How will we get supplies?
How were you getting them before?
The local colony sent us food.
Well, I guess you'll have to use what you have until we can get supplies out here for you.
What if the local colony surrendered?
Then they could resume sending supplies, I guess.
Oh, in that case, they surrender.
Lewis blinked at the space hamster with an 1800s-style uniform complete with fancy frilly hat. "It's a Kityan colony. You can't just expect them to follow your commands," Lewis said with a shake of his head.
Oh, that's my cue.
A Kityan stepped forward. If he had to say it, looked like a tuxedo cat with a monocle and a white moustache. No, wait. That was just white fur. No, wait, yes, fur. He was also wearing an actual tuxedo and a top hat.
I'm in charge of the colony in question. We surrender also.
You were on the ship?
Oh, no, we arrived a short time ago, once we heard you were here.
Lewis looked at the Marine lieutenant, who just shrugged. Okay. So, then the colony can keep sending you food. There were nods of agreement from the crowd, and Lewis frowned as he saw his tech drawing something before putting it up on the projector. It was a decent drawing of the planet, and a shuttle with an arrow moving towards a rough drawing of the ship. So that was it. His tech was an art major. He made a mental note to leave the tech behind with the Marines and get a new one. The next question you had was if you can move to one of our colonies to live out the war in a prison camp where you didn't have to fight. This seems to be a very pressing question you have, and unfortunately the answer is no. There were groans, and he heard a few scattered people asking why not. This is because all our colonies are on death worlds. Everyone got quiet.
All of them?
Asked a hamster up front. Yes, every single one. We give the garden planets and the like to the UAHG. So, instead, we're probably going to just make a prison camp on the colony here, and that's where you'll live. They all seemed to nod at that as well. He saw the tech scribble something else out, and then put up a picture of a camp with hamsters and cats in it. Lewis rolled his eyes for a moment, but now wasn't the time to wonder how he'd ended up with an art major for a tech.
What about meals?
Asked another of the overly fancy uniformed hamsters. What? We just went over this. You'll keep getting food from the colony.
That was for food in general, yes. But will we still get to eat 5 meals a day?
Lewis arched a brow in a mixture of surprise and confusion. But then he realized he didn't know how big their meals were, or how long a day was, so he wasn't sure if that was a lot or a little.
And what about naps?
Asked one of the Kityans. Well, we haven't figured out the logistics, obviously. I assume if you took naps and ate 5 times a day here on the ship, then you can keep doing that down on the colony. Soon, there was a picture of a cat napping in the sun and a hamster eating what he thought was a cake. Lewis wasn't sure if the art from the tech was helping or just trying to make the most of his likely wasted education. As our prisoners, of course, you'll be treated fairly, and obviously, since there are far more of you than there are of us, it'll take some time to get things going.
Would it help if we made the prison camp?
One of the Kityans asked. Lewis looked around the hangar bay at all the mistakes he could see. Can you build a prison camp easily?
I mean, if we're allowed to build it like we do normal buildings, sure. This ship was really hard though, since we were using designs we weren't familiar with.
Yeah, I've been meaning to ask that. Weren't the hamsters helping you build it?
Of course, but we never built one before. The council didn't really think we could, but the Kityans were willing to help us, so we mostly paid for it and designed it and oversaw the construction.
Said one of the fancier hamsters. So none of you had ever actually built a ship like this? They shook their heads. Well, that explains a few things. Sure, I guess you can just build the prison camp too. One of the fancy-dressed Kityans this time raised a hand. Yes?
How come you aren't dressed like us?
Lewis frowned at that and looked down at his uniform. It was just a standard light military pressure suit. He hadn't been willing to change into his formals or even garrison uniform when entering a captive dreadnought. Why would I be?
Well, Our uniforms are based on what we found on your planet a while back. They had the fanciest pants we'd ever seen.
A hamster with additional mutton chop fur said with a nod, as the Ketyans seemed to agree. It's impractical. You guys based your uniforms on ours because they were really fancy? More nodding. Well, we don't wear those anymore. Any other questions?
When do we get to meet he who will deliver us?
What?
The human who will deliver us. The great deliverer.
I have no idea who you're talking about.
Surely you must.
There was murmuring among the crowd as they seemed a little concerned over his lack of knowledge. Lewis was obviously confused. Then he saw a Ketyan hand his tech something. Then the crowd all grew hushed at the picture on the screen behind him. It was a picture of a longhorn and some sort of motto.
Your delivery guaranteed, or my name isn't.
Billy Bob, Space Trucker. Emily was slowly shaking her head as she stood in the cargo bay.
What are you doing?
Wax on, wax off.
Billy Bob was still in the Bork power suit, having spent one of her sleep cycles practicing in the thing. Now he was making strange motions with his limbs.
Grand kick!
He hopped and a foot lashed out.
Daniel-san, hee-ya!
He made chopping motions with his hands. Then he stopped, arms rising up at a strange square angle.
Hey, Emily, what am I?
She blinked as she watched him start to move around in jerky, rough motions. She couldn't tell if it looked like he was being controlled by strings or some sort of automated program.
Puppet?
What? No, come on!
He turned his upper body and kept moving in those strange, jerky movements.
I don't know Billy Bob.
She said as she rested one hand on her cheek as she watched him.
Here's a hint. Domo arigato.
That doesn't translate?
Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto! Emily, come on! He started to sing, of course being off-key.
Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. I am the Mudran man. Secret, I got a secret.
He stopped then and sighed before turning on the speakers hidden in the fur of the suit. When the actual song started to play, Emily let out a slow sound of understanding.
Oh, the song.
Yeah, what else would I be referencing? Come on, Space Assassin, you gotta keep up. Here I've been practicing for ages now. Watch what I can do.
He stood in front of his long horn and shifted rapidly from foot to foot for a moment, wiggling and waving his hands as he seemed to get ready. Then he crouched down and jumped, only to sail way up into the ceiling of the cargo bay, letting out rather unmanly squeal of surprise and come crashing down on the other side of his ship with a heavy thud.
Billy Bob!
Emily rushed over, but the human in the Bork suit was pushing himself back up, waving her off.
No, I'm okay. I just forgot I practiced in my gravity and then lowered it before you got up. Nothing serious.
He brushed himself off and then started to lean one way and then the other to stretch out. I'm getting the hang of it. She was crossing all of her arms as she looked at him.
So it would seem. You haven't left that thing in hours, so I'd expect you to get better.
I need to test other things though, like coordination.
He looked around and then moved over to some empty crates that had been left over from the original owners of the Rosie. He started to lay them out as he looked back over his shoulder.
Can you go get some stuff to drink from the Longhorn? Wait, do space hamsters drink space tea? A very, very weakened version of it compared to our tastes.
She said as he rubbed his chin, then shrugged.
Sure, brew that up. Come back out here when it's done.
Why don't you?
'Cause Mittens will freak if he sees a Bork.
Emily nodded at that and then stepped into the Longhorn, leaving Billy Bob behind. She pulled the tea out, setting about brewing a very weak version of it like she'd been asked. When she stepped back outside with the pot of weak tea on a tray, and a few of his cups, she found Billy Bob had set up the crates as a rough collection of chairs around a table and had the council senator and his chief sneaky busybody sitting around it.
What are we doing, Billy Bob?
She asked, looking around with a bit of confusion.
Surely you must know what we are doing, oh diplomat.
She shook her head.
A tea party, but not the Boston kind.
The others just stared at him.
Don't worry about it.
Emily moved forward, setting the tray down on the crate. She started to reach for the pot, but Billy Bob waved her off. Slowly, he closed and opened his hand, and then delicately picked up the pot, shaking a little as he poured some of the tea into a cup. Then he picked the cup up with two big blue fingers as he held it out for the counselor.
Oh, I say, most splendid. Are there any scrumpetles or fluffer pillows?
I don't know what those are, so no.
Oh, most bothersome. Can we get some?
Sure.
The counselor set his cup down and got up to go find whatever the hell he wanted. Billy Bob poured out a second cup for the chief sneaky busybody, who looked a little nervous as the Billy Bob in the Bork power suit moved, the cup filled with hot liquid over to him. The cup rattled a little in his hand as Billy Bob probably overthought the controls, but then released it gently as the spy visibly relaxed.
Thank you. Do you mind if I also go get some treats?
No, you sit here and wait. We need to keep this tea party rolling. In fact, let's kick this up a notch.
He picked up one of the remaining cups, handing it to Emily empty. Then he picked up the teapot, the little rattling a little as he moved it over her lap as she clutched the cup. She shifted a little as he leaned over her with the hot teapot, his hands shifting and shaking a little, but she moved the cup to follow it and soon had a cup of weak tea.
Look at that! Look how good I am!
He leaned up and cheered, the teapot flying from his hand into the air, hot tea flying out of it as Emily and the hamster squealed and dived to avoid it. Billy Bob cursed and moved to catch it, hopping a bit and catching a foot on the edge of a crate as he fell onto his face, arm outstretched as he caught the teapot.
Still got it!
Bravo, bravo!
The chief Fancy Pants had returned with a bag full of pastries, which he was stuffing into his mouth, crumbs tumbling down his chin. The spy quickly scurried over to grab a few of the pastries as Emily stood back up while dusting himself off.
Okay, maybe a tea party was a bad idea, but I'm really getting the hang of this thing.
Billy Bob said as he looked around the cargo bay, as if trying to find something else to test himself with.
All right, we get it. You're getting good. Just get out of there already.
Emily said as Billy Bob sighed.
All right. Enough of the suit today, I guess.
The hatch opened at the back as he had to squirm and wiggle his way out, getting his upper body out first before looking around, hanging partially from the suit.
Wait, how?
He was a very dense creature from a super heavy gravity planet. There wasn't a person on his ship who could help pull him free. He tried to sit up further, hugging the head of the fake Bork, his upper body free, but he wasn't sure how to pull his legs out and not just fall to the ground.
Oh, I know.
There was a chime through the cargo bay and a flashing light as the gravity turned off. Emily squawked out while the hamsters squeaked, arms flailing as they tried to grab the pastries that were floating away from their bag. Billy Bob quickly pulled his legs out of the suit and righted himself with a smile. Emily had extended her wings for a moment and smiled, jumping up into the air to scoop up the floating hamsters. Her wings flapped as she easily moved through the zero-G environment. Then she looked down as Billy Bob waved his hands.
Toss him to me.
Billy Bob, I don't know how to aim.
Just try it. I'll catch him.
Oh, jolly good. To sail through the air like a snickerblat is such fun.
Emily shrugged and then flapped her wings to hold steady and then part-tossed, Hart shoved the fancy pants hamster down at Billy Bob. He pushed off his suit lightly and floated out to catch the hamster, who was laughing as he held his top hat in place while falling.
Now the other one.
Billy Bob said, clutching the first hamster in a single-armed hug.
Please don't. I'm a little nauseous.
But Emily was already trying to aim as she tossed and shoved the hamster down towards Billy Bob. As he spun through the air, the chief sneaky busybody squeaked and then threw up, blobs of pastry flying out of his mouth. They jiggled and wobbled in the zero-G as Billy Bob and the fancy pants had horrified looks on their faces before Billy Bob dived out of the way. The hamster hit the deck, bouncing off it lightly since they were still in zero-G, the vomit floating above him. Then there was a warning throughout the ship, as for some reason the Rosie had to shift the power. So the gravity came back on as the spy squealed just before the blobs of eaten pastry rained down on him. A voice came on over the PA.
The Libertonian ship was a little closer than expected. Sorry for the evasive maneuver. We'll be docking with them shortly.
Emily glided back down to the ground and walked over to Billy Bob and the fancy pants, looking down at the other hamster, who was lying on the ground, looking worse for wear.
Bit sticky wicky wucket, but no harm. A nice shower will cheer you up.
Yeah, I'll take him to the crew's locker room.
Billy Bob said, carefully picking the fluffy spy up, avoiding the sticky bits. Emily moved a few crates around while he was gone to cover up the few leftover blobs of mess. It wouldn't look good if the other Libertonians started asking what the hell was going on the Rosie before they got there. Soon enough, Billy Bob returned with a smile.
This is kind of exciting. I've never actually met any other Libertonians. Now I get to compare you to everyone else from your species.
Emily blinked at that and looked over at him with a mixture of confusion and anxiety. Seeing her expression, he just laughed and shook his head.
Don't look so worried. I already picked you on a comparison against all the females of my species I knew. You'll do fine.
They waited as they heard the boarding tube extend, much as it had for the space goblins the day before. But this time, the figures that stepped out were much taller, their figures cloaked in those shadowy black suits that Billy Bob had first seen Emily in. He realized now she wasn't lying about being shorter than most of her kin. They all appeared to be several inches taller than her. Their wing colors were various shades and patterns, but they all had black tips. Emily seemed to recognize them, despite the masks, however.
Jonas, so good to see you again. You must be in charge then.
She said, stepping forward towards one of the big figures. But before he could respond, another voice from the back of the group spoke up.
Wrong as usual, Emily. I'm in charge here.
The others stepped away as another female figure stepped forward. She seems to be about the same height as Emily, despite all the taller ones around them.
Amelia! But if you're here, then who's guarding hell?
You're lucky they even let you do more than mop the floors. How you ever managed to graduate from the academy is a mystery to me.
That's because you're a horrible spy. You're probably still confused why no one took you to the dance. Clearly, it was because your colors are drab and your feathers are sparse.
The Libertonian's wings shifted at that, the feathers obviously ruffled at the implication. She reached up and pulled her mask free to reveal crimson-colored feathers with blue eyes that briefly made Billy Bob wonder if she had been eating the spice melange. She walked towards Billy Bob, running a hand along his chin for a moment before turning back to Emily, her wings smacking Billy Bob in the face for a moment as he closed his eyes. So this is the famous human you've found. He's easy on the eyes. It would be a shame if my superior coloring and skills enticed him to leave you. Billy Bob didn't even have time to curse before both women had their gloves off those razor-sharp talons bare, their wings spreading wide. But unlike last time where Emily tried to keep between him and her target, they started to circle around one another. They made those strange chirps as they moved. The other Libertonians hadn't really reacted and just backed up, standing near his longhorn before one of the males waved him over.
Hello, I'm Jonas. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Billy Bob.
He held his fist out and was about to explain when Thomas actually gave him a fist bump without coaching.
Well, damn. Is human culture catching on with you guys?
When your normal form of greeting involves crushing our hands in a display of strength, we find alternate ways to greet you.
Billy Bob nodded at that and then watched Emily and Amelia snap out at one another. The red feathers Emily had only bared in her display back with the CIA agent were on display, and Amelia's red wings with black tips were displaying bright blue feathers among the red.
Is this normal?
For them, it is.
Should we stop them?
I'm not getting involved. I don't feel like getting a face full of talons. Besides, they're young. Let them fight it out.
The Libertonian shrugged and crossed his arms.
Wait. If they're young, how did they both get such important jobs?
Jonas shrugged for a moment. Well, when you're good at killing people and you come from families like those, you just get promoted pretty quickly. I guess we should try and stop the fight, though. We need to discuss getting the two of you down to the planet.
Well, I have an idea. Do you have one of those super fancy pocket dimensions?
The Libertonian unhooked one of those strange devices from his belt, holding it out. Billy Bob touched the activation button to get the blue glow going.
Hey, you two! I'm jumping into another dimension now!
Then leaned into the blue tear as his body seemed to get sucked into the device. Emily and Amelia stopped as they looked over, wings quickly lowering.
Wait, but that'll kill him.
Amelia said, obviously confused. Emily let out an annoyed chirp.
No, apparently he can survive.
She walked over, looking down into the light.
Billy Bob! Billy Bob, you get out here right now! I swear! I have to keep an eye on him, or he gets into all kind of trouble.
Amelia stood next to her, looking down into the blue void.
Billy Bob, can he hear us? Hello, human?
Inside the dimension, Billy Bob was floating in that same blue stuff, looking around as he saw some sort of strange device, and then his eyebrows arched up in surprise as he began swimming towards an object he spotted. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of
Billy Bob Space Trucker,